AskReddit by Ella Grigsby. ER doctors nurses of Reddit, what's the craziest injury a patient of yours has survived? Suicide attempt, crossbow to the head. Entry was from the mouth and exiting out the top of the head. The arrow was sticking straight through his head like a cartoon. He was alert, oriented, and much calmer than you would think. He was fine. I saw a patient like that once. There was about a foot of carbon fiber crossbow shaft sticking out of the top of his head. The ER nurses were very concerned that traveling through the hallways, someone might accidentally hit the protruding shaft portion, so someone got the idea to carefully tie an orange rubber tourniquet to the end of the arrow. So later we had the trauma team escorting the patient to CT, who now looks like a 2x4 hanging off the back of a pickup truck, and me snickering at this is one of the many reasons I'm going to hell. Maybe not the craziest injury, but I once had a 101-year-old patient who fell down the stairs and broke her neck. No prior medical history and no other injuries. She was just very annoyed with the neck brace she had to wear and wanted to go home. She was discharged a week later. At 102, my great-aunt fell down the stairs and wound up with a blood clot in her brain. With her age, they decided this was just her time. 3 months later she was still hanging in strong. So they operated, removed the clot. She lived to 108. Crazy. Air nurse on night shift. Few months back a couple was driving drunk, had a horrible wreck. Killed the other driver instantly. The couple hit something that ends up going through the car somehow. Husband lost both legs but survived. Wife was basically in half on the front side. Intestines falling out of her body and into my hands while trying to move her. She was still alert when they initially brought her and then quickly sedated and intubated. It was a night all the residents had off before an exam, so I was lucky enough to go right into trauma surgery to help out since they were short-handed. I literally watched the trauma surgeon go inch by inch through her intestines trying to repair what she could. Surprisingly, the only major damage was a laceration to her bladder and maybe 18 inches of intestines gone. She not only made it out of surgery, she survived and is alive today. I've seen lots of gunshots, huge lacerations and broken bones, but this was one I'll never forget. I love working in the ER. It's always interesting. With that much intestine gone, did she need a bag? Oh wow, I have so many. One guy was thrown from his car and impaled on a tree. Another guy choked on a sandwich and his wife gave him the Heimlich and perforated his esophagus. Another guy attempted suicide by swallowing a hanger. I'm engaged to an ER scribe med student who comes home with some crazy stuff, including a guy who was in a motorcycle accident and came in with a branch through his mouth. Like straight through one cheek and out the other, couldn't close his mouth. I've been in to have my heel glued back on. A guy called Tiny. Weighed about 500 pounds. Got gut shot with a .22. It nicked his aorta and zipped around, separating his intestines. He weighed 250 pounds when he left ICU. Another young guy had a CABG. He got staph infection in his sternum, then staph pneumonia. Another RN and me took care of him on a roto-rest kinetic treatment table on our 3-11 and 11-7 shifts. The rotation loosened up the pneumonia. We were suctioning so much from his lungs. Central Supply left a case of canisters for us to use each shift. I'll never forget the pale grey-yellow color of the output, and it's been 40 years. He went a step down after 2 weeks. I was so impressed with the bed, I went to work for the company as a territory manager. I just went down a rabbit hole about that bed. How interesting. Ruptured thoracic aortic aneurysm. It has a crazy high mortality rate. Happened outside the hospital in an 80-plus-year-old male. After a 10-hour surgery to repair it, they got to me in the ICU. The chest tube, placed to prevent a buildup of blood around the heart, post-up, dumped 2 liters of blood over an hour, and they ended up going back for a revision of the operative area. Guy self-extubated a couple days later and left the ICU after a week. He was motoring around the unit like he didn't just have a bomb explode in his chest. Amazing. Deleted. Oh my god, I think you're talking about my cousin 20-ish years ago. 16-foot piece of rebar in the chest. He lost the middle lobe of his right lung but left the hospital after 3 months. Trucking company paid 8 figures. Not an EDPT, but when I was in school I saw a 750 gram neonate. I met him again at the hospital for his 13th birthday. Got them, that's only barely over £1.50 for those of us relying on freedom units. I love that for him. Motorcycle ride head on into a car that was on the wrong side of the road. Bike doing 60-70 kph, car 80-90. Rider went over bars and head first into the windshield, which had a basketball-sized hole in it. When I got out of the truck I was sure I'd be looking for a body. I found my patient squatting over his ruined bike. It was brand new. He'd bought it yesterday. And this, kids, is why you buy and wear expensive riding gear. This guy had a top shelf helmet, neck and spine protector, along with the usual leathers, gloves, boots, etc. Biker here and have seen good quality gear save people from unbelievable things. I second your advice. Saw post-crash photos from a guy in a forum and I'm locally who took out about 30 young trees on the side of the road with his head and body. Trees about 10 cm diameter. He walked away from it and posted the pictures the following day. He couldn't believe he was alive and neither could anyone else. Wear a $100 helmet if you have a $100 brain. Neither of those, but an EMT for a couple years. Picked up a guy who slipped and fell over backwards. His eye popped out. He was so incredibly chill about it, and it turns out had had the same injury before. We stabilized the eye and took him an hour away to a specialist and he was cheering us up the whole way. Worked ophthalmology for 2 years. Retina service at teaching clinic. Paged for the fellow to come to the ER and we were like, what? ER? That's usually for cornea. Nope. Turns out, patient tried to commit suicide by jamming an ice pick through his eye, but he somehow only nicked the retina in the back of his eye. Cornea, etc. was all unscathed. The knob of the ice pick was mounted in his eye socket, which looked odd to say the least. After we left the ER, the fellow mumbled to me, dude needed better aim and a longer pick next time. Young guy stabbed in the heart, brought in by POV. He arrested shortly after arrival. The ER doc cracked his chest, sutured the hole and did internal cardiac massage. We got him back. Few days in the ICU and he went home. I had a guy with a similar story. It was so amazing to see such a good outcome. Most don't survive, or if they do they're anoxic. UED staff do amazing things, down and stab. Legs in a wood chipper. Not that surprising that he survived, but my god, the damage. And then everything got infected. Not sure if he survived that part. Attempted suicide off a bridge onto concrete. He'll never walk again but survived. Or sure, he'll survive his mental health issues. Acid attack to the face. I suppose that's also not a crazy survival story, but the surgeries after surgeries the poor girl had to go through to even look somewhat human. My mum worked in a chicken processing plant like 20 years ago and the mincer machine thing got jammed. For some reason, no one unplugged the machine or turned it off and some dude shoved his arm in to clear the jam. Arm was shredded, he lost it, all the way up to his shoulder. I had a dude come in because his scaffolding gave out and he fell approximately 15 feet and saddled a bar right on his testicles. Lucky for him, no fracture or scrambled eggs in his scrotum. Lots of abrasions and bruising. Note to self, close legs when falling. Patient here, Humpty Dumpty'd off a 32 feet wall, lived. I guess all the king's horses and all the king's men actually did put you back together again. Was ER nurse in my former life. Aortic dissection from the neck to the groin. She was grey and somehow survived. Literally just a complete fluke that she survived. Aortic dissection? Had a lady in her early 20s who was pregnant with her 5th child. She tried to end her pregnancy with a handgun to her belly. The fetus survived. Tried to get her admitted to psych but she refused and she was discharged to finish the pregnancy. That's just unbelievably horrible and heartbreaking. That poor woman. Entire pole through the head after a traffic accident when I was a resident. They had to cut off the ends of the pole to get him through the CT scanner. Doctors reviewing the CT images. HMM. There appears to be a pole through his head. Homeless alcoholic man who lived outside. Frequently brought in with core body temps in the 70s and back in the upper 0.30s 0.40s in the winter. Warmed up and sent to ICU over and over again over a period of months. Edit. Just found his obituary. Seems he just passed away last summer and I had him as a patient a few years ago. Seems he just kept on going. The human body can be so weirdly resilient sometimes. Edit. Seems he had a big loving family. Alcoholism addiction is a beast. Honestly, he was kind of a funny guy. Just so drunk and so cold. Swore he was a popsicle one time and just snapped out of it after some warm fluids and a bear hugger and was ready to go drink more. Can't recall how many times I had to get rectal temps on him over that winter. It was a lot. RIP sir. There's a really cool video about a guy like that named Michael Malloy https://yahoo.be/kuyyldsn6kq. In RN school in the ER had these landscapers that had to trim some hedges. They didn't have a trimmer and one of them had the brilliant idea to use a push mower with their hands. That went as well as you'd think. Had another middle-aged man walk in with his wife and teenage daughter that wouldn't sit down. Turns out he shoved a mag light up there and perforated his colon. Dumbus had to have surgery. And lastly, during my psych rotation, had a guy that was basically a shell of a person as he tried committing suicide via gun to his head twice and survived both tries. Last one made me gasp. Not my story but my BF who used to work overnights at the ER. A guy had to be transported by fire truck because he removed the dial off of his oven. There's a needle that holds the dial to the oven and he shoved it up his pee hole then got stuck. Firefighters had to carve the metal around his dick to get him transported. My favorite story though is the time a guy strolled into the ER, went up to the desk and casually placed his blood-soaked severed ear on the counter. He was like, yeah, I need some help. Turns out his ex-wife or something got mad at him and attacked him with a knife which sliced off his ear. Not gonna lie, when you mentioned an oven I was expecting burn injuries, not that. Suicide attempt by drinking Drano. Few weeks in ICU and he ended up fine. Ike that puts you at high risk for getting cancer in the future. Not mine but a former boss of mine, when he was an intern in the ER at Johns Hopkins, had a patient come in with a W-beam guardrail through the center of his abdomen. Not only was said patient alive, he was stable, conscious, and talking. Nothing important had been hit. A patient took 100 plus tablets of his wife's blood pressure medication as a suicide attempt. He was fine at first, talking and just annoyed of the overall situation. His wife called 911 when she realized. Then, suddenly he collapsed. Pressure and heart rate were dropping. We were throwing absolutely everything and nothing was working. He was on 6 IV medications to try to keep his blood pressure up, each one of them maxed out. Eventually we put him on life support called DCMO. He got 17 liters of fluids in one day from all the IV medications we were giving him trying to keep his blood pressure up that he went into kidney failure from fluid overload and needed continuous dialysis. I really thought he was going to die. He was eventually weaned off life support and all supportive IV meds after about a month in the ICU. He said he was happy to be alive. I had a patient who was hit by a train. Managed to crawl to a nearby pub who called ambulance. When the police checked nearby CCTV for a suspected hit and run, he was so drunk he doesn't remember it at all. They watched him get thrown 15 feet in the air by a freight train. Don't work in the ED, but saw an aortic root blow off after aneurysm repair just as the surgeons were about to close. First geyser of blood shot about 5 feet straight up into the air.